Hi, I'm Dr. Daniela Bruckman, and this data analysis video is all about understanding types of data. First and foremost, let's define what data is. Data is the factual information, such as measurements, that are used as a basis for understanding calculation. Scientists use data to draw conclusions from experiments that have been carried out to test a hypothesis. Now, the data that's collected by researchers is incredibly diverse and can be analyzed in a multitude of ways. However, there's some almost universal strategies for making sense of a spreadsheet full of numbers. Simple calculations can be done to provide an idea of general patterns in a data set. For example, one could calculate the average of a data set to get an idea of the central tendency. Or one could calculate the standard deviation in order to understand how much variance there is in a particular set of numbers. Oftentimes, data is used to produce a graph or a figure, which is a great way to visualize your data and kind of make sense of what's going on in there and be able to see patterns in your data sets. And finally, more complex statistical tests can be done in order to test for whether there is significant differences between distinct sets of data. Now, in this video, we're going to get back to the basics and just understand the different types of data so that we can identify these types of data and sort of begin to understand how it's important for doing things like biology. Okay, the first major distinctions that can be made in data is going to be the difference between qualitative data and quantitative data. Now, qualitative data is by definition descriptive and is not going to involve the use of numbers or values. So qualitative data can be useful. For example, you can state that water quality is hazy or that a group of animals is behaving in a disorganized way. So qualitative data describes a system or a study that you're doing. It can provide context or a narrative, but it's usually very difficult to analyze statistically because of that lack of numbers or values. Now, on the other hand, quantitative data does measure values. It uses usually numbers. Quantitative data can be broken down into two further categories. The first one being numerical data, which is expressed with digits. Now, numerical data in and of itself can be categorized into either discrete or continuous variables or data. So discrete numerical data is going to be composed of whole number integers. For example, the number of offspring that an individual has. This is going to be data, for example, that is countable. You can't have a fraction of an offspring, right? The other type of numerical data is continuous data, which on the other hand is not countable. For example, beak length. You could measure the beak of a bird and have a fraction of a measurement, like 2.56 centimeters. Okay, so that's numerical data. The other type of quantitative data is known as categorical data, which is non-numeric in information. For example, you might be comparing warm versus cold water temperatures, red versus yellow flowers, or male versus female individuals. You'll see that in our video on graphing, numerical data is usually used to make a scatter plot graph like the one here on the left. Notice that the x-axis would be showing us numerical data, whereas categorical data would usually be used to produce something like a bar or column graph shown here on the right. Okay, so this is a good time to review the difference between independent and dependent variables. So when it comes to thinking about the difference between categorical and numerical data, oftentimes we want to think about how this is relevant to the independent variable of an experiment. Recall that the independent variable is the variable in an experiment that is manipulated or changed. Okay, so if it's numerical data, we might be interested in following plant growth over time, where time is the independent variable and it is certainly numerical and continuous. Another example would be beak length. Maybe we want to see if there is a correlation between beak size and the number of, say, insects that a bird catches. Beak length would be the independent variable and it is numerical. Now, on the other hand, we can think about categorical examples. Let's say we want to compare the number of bee visits to red versus yellow flowers. Notice that red and yellow are going to be categorical variables and they represent the independent variable in this question. Okay, now what about the dependent variable? The dependent variable, remember, is what responds to the manipulation in an experiment. It's depending on the independent variable. Now, in general, dependent variables are numerical, and so usually within the context of a biology class, you wouldn't have to worry about deciphering between categorical and numerical data for the dependent variable. All right, now's your chance to get some practice. I've got some questions here, and so what I suggest you do is push the pause button and see if you can categorize these 5 scientific questions as having independent variables that are either categorical or numerical. Go ahead and do that now. Okay, hopefully you had an opportunity to do that. Let's work through these questions together. The first one, do vaccinated people suffer fewer colds than unvaccinated people? If you chose categorical, you were correct. Vaccinated versus unvaccinated. These are different categories of people. Let's look at the next one. Does the risk of cancer increase with age? If you chose numerical data, then you are correct. Here, the key thing is looking at the independent variable, which would be age. As age changes, do we see an increase in the risk of cancer? Let's look at number 3. Oops, push the button too soon. Do female mice burn more daily calories than male mice? Here we're comparing male versus female mice, and therefore it is, of course, a categorical form of an independent variable. Next question is, do increasing ocean temperatures cause coral bleaching? Here, let's think about the independent variable. This would be ocean temperatures. As ocean temperatures change, do we see an increased incidence in coral bleaching? So this would be a great example of a numerical independent variable. Last one, do larger flowers receive more visits from pollinators? All right, that one's also numerical. The independent variable would be the size of the flower and seeing whether it receives more or fewer visits from pollinators. So the size of a flower is certainly going to be a numerical variable. Hopefully you got those ones right. Okay, so let's review what we have learned in this video. In this lesson, you should have learned the difference between qualitative and quantitative data, the difference between numerical and categorical quantitative data, and finally, the difference between discrete and continuous numerical data. We also reviewed how to identify independent and dependent variables of an experiment. I hope this was helpful, and don't forget to watch our other videos on data analysis for biology students. Thank you.